Hi, everyone. We're just getting final preparations ready to go. We'll be with you shortly. Everyone, this is Rob Lee. I'm going to be kicking things off here in about 30 seconds. Just hold tight while we're still bringing a lot of people into the Zoom channels. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and get kicked off. Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Lee. I'm the Chief Curriculum Director here at the SANS Institute. And over the past few weeks, and especially the past few days, we have seen a very sombering reminder of how fragile the world is, and especially when it comes to what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, all of Europe, and what people are feeling here in the United States. One of the key questions at the SANS Institute has been continually asked is, what do we do to prepare? Is there going to be cyber spillover? What is exactly the threat actors' capabilities? What is the history here? And while we have an extensive history with Russian cyber threats, even going back in my own history, my first nation state attacker that I ever investigated was a part of an investigation back in 1998 called Moonlight Maze, which was a Russian cyber threat actor that was targeting DoD installations. It is without saying that obviously there's a lot of angst, uncertainty, and fear, uncertainty, and doubt surrounding the events that are currently taking place in the Ukraine and abroad. Of course, our hearts go out to those individuals that are affected by the invasion and the current casualties that are currently going on as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. But today, what we'd really like to focus in on is talking about the Russian cyber threat, what we currently know about it, what they have currently been up to over the past several weeks, in addition to, one of the key questions that a lot of people have: what is their true capabilities about being able to affect the infrastructure, not only in the Ukraine, but spillover effects that might and could occur in the European Union, around the world, and here in the United States. Joining me today, we have three experts that are extremely well known around the world: Kevin Holboat, Jake Williams, and Tim Conway. We're going to be kicking things off with Kevin Holboat. Kevin is currently leading up a cyber threat intelligence cell that is helping inform the Center for Cybersecurity in Belgium and across the European Union. He was personally recommended by Katie Nichols, who, when I initially asked if she was interested in doing this, she basically said, Kevin is the person you want doing this. Looking at Kevin's slides and moving through this, Kevin is one of our leading cyber threat intelligence analysts, and he has extremely detailed information about the Russian cyber threat. So without further ado, I would like to kick it over to Kevin. Now, one last thought here. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll address the questions at the end of the presentation. So please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll address the questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I want to introduce Kevin Holboat.
Thanks a lot, Rob, for the introduction. Is sound good?
It's great.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot. Well, thank you for welcoming me. And as you said, I am indeed the lead for the Threat Research Center within the Citrus department, which is then the CTI department and led by my boss, Pedro. Thanks a lot for that introduction. Now, when we go into Russia's cyber capabilities, we'll look over a couple of things today. I won't handle everything. I mean, it's too short to do everything in here, but I'll just go over the little points, the most interesting and most important points you need to know about Russia's cyber capabilities. Next slide, please. So at first, I want to show you the kind of mapping between the APTs, the Advanced Persistent Threat Groups that we have observed in the past and are still observing these days, and the mapping that we sometimes can see, after attribution, with the different security and intelligence services in the Russian Federation. The first one you can see here on the left, which is under the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin himself, that's the SVR, or the Foreign Intelligence Service. Now, under that, there are a couple of departments, a couple of directorates, and one of them is the Cyber Operations Center, which APT-29 has been attributed to. So if you see any APT-29, Cozy Bear, or any of the Dukes kind of activity, you're probably getting attacked by the Cyber Operations Center. On the right, you can see the Ministry of Defense, and under that we have the GRU. For us, that is mainly the main intelligence directorate, right? There we see multiple groups. We see APT-28. We also see Sandworm, which we'll look into a little bit later in the slides today. Next slide, please. Then the third one is the FSB, the Federal Security Service. And in there we see Gamaredon, which is also very important, has been dealing with a lot of activity these days. We have Turla, I think one of the oldest APTs in Russia, if not the oldest one that we saw. And there's a couple of other names over there that you can see. And the last one is the FSO, or the Federal Protective Service. At the moment, no APT groups have been attributed to this service, but who knows, maybe we'll find something later when we do more attribution. So what can we learn from this? Only from this graphical, this infograph. So by the way, thank you for the author of this. There is a large amount of advanced activity groups that are operating from Russia against the rest of the world. These things, these couple of activity groups that we see here have been attributed to different departments and sections of the Russian security and intelligence services. For example, with the GRU and the FSB, we even see that they have some kind of a relationship with cyber criminal groups and hacktivist groups. What are they exactly doing? Are they forcing them to do something? Are they paying them? Are they asking them? We don't know for sure, but they do seem to have some kind of relationship with a couple of cybercriminal and activist groups. And the last point I want to make is that it looks as if they seem to share some guidelines. I mean, they seem to share some modus operandi, some way of operating. Sometimes we even see sharing of tools between the different groups, which are linked to different departments. So are they partnering in this, or do they have some competition, which is also a rumor that I've heard in the past, between the departments? I don't know. Maybe we'll see that in the future. Next one, please. And what have we seen so far? I'll first go into the important activity groups we want to keep track of at the moment. There's actually one that I saw this afternoon, which has become very active. So CERT Ukraine has published information about UNC 1151, which is apparently behind a misinformation and influence campaign, and which is now sending this afternoon a lot of spear phishing emails to the rest of the world, but of course, especially Ukraine. Thank you, by the way, CERT Ukraine, for sharing so much information. Now, one of the important ones is Sandworm. This one is known to have or to be attacking Ukraine and others with very destructive attacks, right? They have been active since at least 2009, maybe earlier, but then we don't really see any destructive attacks going on there. Who knows, maybe more information later on. Now we have APT28 and APT29 attributed to either the GRU or SVR, and they seem to be dealing with a lot of espionage campaigns all over the world. I mean, we've seen them in Europe, we see them in the United States, we see them all over the place. If they have an interest in you, they will try to do some espionage on you and steal your information. These are active since 2004 and 2008. Then a new one that we've seen, and that has been attributed by Microsoft, is the DEF 0586. Now, this one is related to the destructive wiper attack Whispergate that we saw on the 15th of January. Jake will tell you more on that one later on. So let's go into the next activity group, which is Gamma Redden. Gamma Redden is a group that seems to be operating from Crimea, so very close to Ukraine, if not within Ukraine, you know, depending on who you're talking with. And they target the Ukrainian government specifically. They try to target officials and organizations, and all of those targets seem to be aligned with Russian interest, with Russian strategy. The last one is Bootstrap. That is a very special group, which has started as being a criminal group targeting financial organizations, but now they seem to have shifted and are kind of attacking in state interest. They're still going after financial organizations, but the way they're doing it seems to be related more to state actors or state activity. Next, please. Then in the cyber attacks that we've seen multiple cyber attacks in the last 2 months, even more since September, since the whole deal with NATO started. But one of the most important things that we have been dealing with in Europe and in the rest of the world, and especially in Ukraine, I mean, the amount of attacks that they've done there are the following attacks. So first one, DDoSes against government, military, financial institutions, telcos, ISPs, doesn't matter. I mean, if you're of interest to attack you, to stop you from broadcasting anything, they will DDoS your environment. Destructive wipers, we already went into that a little bit. Whispergate on the 13th of January, 2022, and Hermetic Wiper on the 22nd of February. I mean, this week. Then we have some espionage attacks that also happened against Ukraine, but also internationally. Look at the CISA alert that was published a couple of days ago, where they warned about Russian state actors doing espionage attack against the Department of Defense, or at least military targets. Now we have defacement of websites, which has been very big. And there was even a supply chain attack at the Kitsoft company. So what apparently happened, the Kitsoft company was compromised by these attackers, and their administrative privileges towards the websites hosted by the Ukrainian government were then defaced and had the message that you can see on the right on those websites. Next one is influence operations. A lot of influence operations and disinformation campaigns are going on in the last couple of years. But now this has increased a lot. I mean, the amount of disinformation and influence operations that we see these days is magnificent. They even use things like SMS messages towards citizens telling that ATMs are not working and just making people crazy, like, oh no, I need to get some money, right? So these things are happening through SMSs, social media, and any other media channel they can use. We've even seen information or disinformation and information operations against their own citizens, like trying to say, we are doing a good job and we should attack Ukraine for this or that reason. Also, be aware of false flags operations. If you're looking into this information, if you're looking at, if you're looking about certain things, beware of false flag operations. For example, in Whispergate, it seems that everything was pointing to a pro-Ukrainian hacking group because of the link, the 80% overlap in code with white black crypt ransomware, which in some couple of links has been attributed to Ukraine's special services and armed forces. So they are trying to go in that direction, but beware if you're doing any investigation. Next one. And here I'm trying to make an overview with the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, an overlap matrix for the 6 groups that I mentioned. So the UNC 1151, you'll have to add that there. I also didn't include the sub techniques because otherwise my slide would go crazy. But it's just good to know and good to do in your own environment to just have these overlaps, to look at them and to see what are the most important things we need to protect them against. For example, command and scripting interpreter. If you see anyone manually doing any commands or manually doing any PowerShell, Linux shell, or whatever on your workstations, and normally your users aren't doing this, then you should maybe flag this and alert on that. Same for phishing. A lot of phishing is being used against the users to target them and to make them install something. That's where you see the user execution. They're just socially engineering your users to click on something. So look at the red parts in here and go further. Try to map that to your mitigations, try to map that to your defenses. Next slides. Here are some resources. I won't go into this, but here are some resources to follow the situation. CERT Ukraine, as I mentioned before, is doing an awesome job at sharing information. You can go on their Facebook, on their Twitter, but also on their website. They have really great articles. Just use some Google Translate if you can't speak Ukraine. I'm doing it myself for the last couple of weeks, and it actually works great. Then we have national CERT websites from your own country. For example, the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium also has a couple of websites that you can go to find information on what's going on. Here we are looking at CISA, for example, in the United States, with alerts and also the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, which is a very important one to look at when you're prioritizing your vulnerability management. We can never forget SANS Internet Storm Center, public media outlets, if you're following geopolitical situations, MITRE-ATT&CK and the CIS controls. Next, please. And then to conclude this, we can say that Russia by itself is a powerful actor, also a powerful cyber actor, right? So on two things, they seem to combine and they seem to use this kind of hybrid attack strategy where they, in cyberspace, will use multiple techniques, multiple attacks like DDoSes and malware attacks, destructive attacks, and so on, all at the same time, very coordinated, very strategically done in a good way. It's always with purpose that they do it. And they seem to combine it these days also with the physical attacks against Ukraine since yesterday, unfortunately. Now, they do have long-term experience. As Rob already said, Moonlight Maze was attacking the US since 1996. Well, not Moonlight Maze, it was Turla, but the case is called Moonlight Maze. So they have been able to build for a very long time to build their cyber capabilities and especially their offensive cyber capabilities. They use a lot of different TTPs, but try to use that overlap matrix to see what the most important things are. Now, these days, most attacks are against Ukraine, but we do see that in Europe and in the rest of the world, there are some attacks that are ongoing for one reason or another. And do never forget things like NotPetya, where we saw a lot of collateral damage. I mean, this thing, for example, for Marsk and a bunch of other countries worldwide, some say that it costs about $10 billion. And last but not least, prepare your defenses. Stay structured, stay calm, keep on preparing your defenses, and share your information with the community. Thank you. Back to Rob or to Jake.
All right, thank you. Extremely helpful to be able to map out the long-term history of the cyber threat from Russia and be able to connect the dots of what is currently going on. Like I said, my first case that I worked on was Moonlight Maze as a nation state attacker. And it's just phenomenal just to see what's been going on for the history here. That analysis was spot on. Leading up next is Jake Williams, who's going to be walking through the current and known Russian cyber activity and some of the myths surrounding it. For those of you who do not know Jake Williams, he's a former operator from the DoD. He's one of these few individuals that I honestly could say has been there and done that in almost every single type of cybersecurity analysis, activity, operations, offensive malware analysis, incident response, threat hunting, ransomware, and all of the above. Jake is one of those individuals that if you really want to know what's going on, you turn to Jake and say, Jake, what's your current lay of the land? And not only will he tell you what's currently going on, he'll also tell you his opinion about it, which is extremely helpful because a lot of people are afraid to actually lean in and saying, hey, this is going on, but it's not as big as a deal as most people are making it. So I truly lean on Jake for a lot of advice when these incidents come in. And SANS has relied on Jake for leading not just this urgent webcast, but for many emergency webcasts in the past. Without further ado, Jake Williams.
Hey, Rob, appreciate it, definitely. So I want to start here briefly by just discussing the hacktivists, and I put that in quotes, obviously, because we don't know, right? As Kevin mentioned, we obviously have the potential for false flag attacks. Russia has been at the forefront, actually, of documented false flag cases. Whether we're talking about Olympic destroyer a few years ago, all the way up, obviously, through Whispergate. And so, we have some evidence already of some hacktivism in place. One of these I just wanted to call attention to is this Free Civilian. They've been very busy, right? And they have a dark website. I'm not linking it here for I think pretty obvious reasons, but it's a .onion site anyway. But they've been fairly busy. They're claiming that the data of these Ukrainian citizens is for sale. They've compromised a number of different organizations. These are large dumps. The data is unconfirmed, though, right? So I expect to see more claims of these data dumps, over the next couple of weeks. They are posting some links already, although they're of course password protected files, right? They don't really want you in many cases to actually look at and vet the data, and this leads me to believe this is probably another one of these influence operations. Whether or not they've actually compromised that data or not is insignificant, or the data they claim is insignificant. The claim itself makes Ukraine appear weak, and posting links, you get to Mega, and there are multiple 10 gig downloads that you could pull down, and again, it really does make Ukraine appear weak. It does distract from other ongoing attacks that may be more directly attributed to Russian intelligence services that Kevin briefed us about. And of course, it demonstrates that, quote unquote, private actors are responsible for attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure as well. Can you advance the slide there for the buildup? Perfect. Yeah, and so you can see here, and by the way, this is a partial list of some of these new leaks. And advance one more for me. Yeah, perfect. And so then you see here again, some supposed dialogue going on here. That this is clearly meant to mock up, one of the ransomware double extortion style sites like Happy Blog or that type of thing. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk a little bit about the malware that we've seen. Kevin talked a bit about, we've seen Whispergate. We obviously saw some new, very new actually in the last couple of days. Malware come in as well, wiper-related malware. I want to call out a commonality that a couple of folks and some in the industry seem to have missed, and that's that we see Russia again operationalizing signed device drivers for their wiper malware. We've seen this now on multiple occasions, right? A very obvious case of that would be the Kill Disk malware that was used in the 2015 attacks on Ukrainian power distribution. And this week's Hermetic Wiper used a different set of drivers, or a different driver from Ease US using Partition Master. This is important because Microsoft, back in the day, went ahead and set up basically what we call patch guard or kernel patch protection. And so this only allows, or as part of that control, they only allow digitally signed device drivers to load into the Windows kernel. Well, if I want to do great wiping operations, and I don't mean like generic ransomware where I'm going to go encrypt a couple of files, not to downplay the risk of ransomware, obviously, but if I want to go in and screw up the master boot record, right? If I want to go in and start really making recovery difficult, extremely difficult, then I need to get something into the kernel. And so we've seen this technique of basically embed a signed device driver from another organization and then load that. We've seen that used repeatedly. So this one's an interesting one as well from a timing perspective, because this new Hermetic Wiper, it's being named this because of a stolen digital certificate from Hermetica Digital. And of course, that certificate's now been revoked. But this first observed sample was compiled December 28th. Now, this gives us some insight. By the way, for those that aren't familiar with this, there's a compile timestamp in portable executables, not .NET, but most PEs have basically a compile timestamp. And so we can see the metadata now points us to December 28th is when this was built. This can obviously be modified, but in this case, I don't think it's likely that it was, given the timing here. And of course, as well, probably worth mentioning that as well, probably worth mentioning here on the timestamp that it wasn't seen in virus total up to that point either. So it looks like this tool was prepped earlier, digitally signed with that Hermetica signature. We saw another sample that was compiled on February 23rd. So my takeaway from this is that Russian threat actors are quickly retooling. But my takeaway here is if you have tooling that supports it and you consider yourself to be high risk for wiper operations, for instance, and we'll talk a bit about that in a second, but if you, for instance, are operating in Eastern Europe and you think that you're at high risk for this, if you can prevent the loading of only basically of any unknown device driver, that may be a decent route to take here, because we've seen now repeated use of these digitally signed device drivers, right? So they're not going to show up as malware, the driver itself, but if you can prevent that load, that may save you in some cases. Next slide, please. Perfect. I want to talk quickly about the domains, right? So we've seen a lot of domains that have been registered, and I want to throw out here that some of these, they're really not going out of their way here to really camouflage what's going on. You'll notice here the who is here for coagula.online. They used reg.ru. Right. So, and I say they, meaning Russian threat actors. These have all been tied back to or attributed back to, with at least moderate confidence, high in many cases, Russian government threat actors. And so, here you see again, it's typical today that most who is data is anonymized anyway. Here now they don't even bother to do that. They don't even bother going outside for a different registrar. This is just reg.ru, and it all but says we are GRU, in this, or SVR. We are Russian intelligence in this, the who is. All that said, it is worth taking a look at, the registration dates here, and I think it's rather interesting, that we're seeing a little bit of older infrastructure that may have been built a little bit ago, and we're also seeing some, also potentially, seeing some other infrastructure that is, and again, these may be domains that were taken over. For instance, coagula.online. May have previously been registered by somebody else, let go, and they picked it up. That's not entirely clear here, but again, you can see that there's been a lot of very recent activity within the last couple of months here for these domains that are being used, and I think the registration date kind of points to that. One tool that I would recommend taking a hard look at if you're doing some monitoring, you have the ability to monitor TLS certificates as they're traversing your network. Census.io, CENSYS.io, has a great search tool available for certificate transparency logs. And of course, since HTTPS is at this point pretty much ubiquitous, you get a chance to see what ultimately basically how those certs are being issued. Now, a lot of these domains are hiding behind Cloudflare currently, and I would expect in the coming days or days or weeks at the outside, Cloudflare to get a little bit better at fronting these domains. So all that said, next slide, please. So also want to note here about scans against Ukrainian IP space. Gray Noise, outstanding service. Absolutely love this for reducing your noise floor in your network analysis. They are providing a free feed, hats off to these folks, a free feed of IP addresses that are only being observed targeting their sensors in Ukrainian IP space. So these folks have sensors all over the world. And here we're now looking at specifically where are they targeting Ukrainian IP space. I've got the link for the feed in the slides there. I know these slides are getting published as well, but I want to say thanks for them because, here it's worth noting that, they've got some great data here, and it is not unforeseeable that these IP addresses may be reused in later operations. They may even be targeting you now and just avoiding Gray Noise's sensors. I doubt that, but again, I'd want to have these and be identifying these in my, obviously in my own network telemetry. Next slide, please. Okay, real quick, I want to drop some of the FUD out here a little bit, but I also want to say don't get MIRSed, right? Collateral damage, and we keep hearing questions. I'm hearing a lot of questions from executives, on quote unquote spillover attacks, right? And what they're really referring to is, hey, am I at risk from NotPetya happening again, right? Collateral damage from the 2017 NotPetya attacks, they obviously demonstrated the risk of unfiltered business-to-business VPNs. And the situation is unfortunately not improved that much today. Any mass spillover event like NotPetya will rely, like NotPetya, on automated propagation. And so your action items are right here. And I know SANS is publishing some collateral on this as well. But this is it. Inventory your B2B VPNs, block high-risk profile or high-risk protocols on those. And I've got a list of my top high-risk protocols there. Implement NetFlow monitoring on all your egress and on all your egress points. If you can only do one thing today, it's that. Go turn on NetFlow and start logging it today. Sooner or later, CISA is going to release, CISA or some other government agency or provider is going to release a set of indicators that will include network data. You will be asked, were we targeted? Were threat actors successful in getting into our network based on these indicators? And you want to have that data. Turn that on now. You can do that before you go home today without any question. Turn on that NetFlow collection. I want at least 90 days looking back, right? I can't undo the past, but I can turn it on now. If you have it on now but don't have 90 days, let's up that threshold. Drive space is cheap. This doesn't have to go into Splunk. It doesn't have to go into anything super expensive. Literally, you could go out to Best Buy, buy a $300 laptop, throw an external hard drive on it, and start logging NetFlow on the majority of small, medium business egress points. So next slide, please. Want to quickly talk about targeting. As Rob mentioned, I've sat on the other side of the keyboard, right? I'm not just pontificating here about what I think or what I might have read in a book or whatever. Have a little bit of experience here, right? And I like to think about threats as that intersection of intent, opportunity, and capability. Kevin covered capability. Opportunity is really what we have or what we present to the threat actor. What I want to highlight, though, is intent. And I haven't seen a lot of this in public reporting. As you speak to your executives, your stakeholders, let's really bring down the FUD level a bit, right? Your Russian government operators are really busy right now, right? The extent to which they may have done some retaliatory targeting, lots of retaliatory targeting for US and EU sanctions, that all changed, and their prioritization around that all changed the second they rolled into Ukraine. And began conducting combat operations in Ukraine. They are really, really busy right now with really important government targets. Hacktivists may have time to kill, but the good news is that's largely going to be DDoS until the situation on the ground changes, combat operations stabilize. The targeting is largely going to be around NATO and certainly other European Union government agencies, to the extent that they're targeting any civilian agencies or civilian targets. With large-scale destructive cyber attacks, I'd be looking at places geographically that make sense for bringing reinforcements into Ukraine. So Poland, Romania, etc. Right? If I had a large operation in Romania, like a lot of folks have outsourced MSSPs, yeah, that's a place I'd definitely be looking and definitely be thinking about those those impacts. But honestly, not here in the U.S. Right? At least not for the foreseeable future, a couple of weeks, possibly more, until things stabilize. Time is on your side here. Next slide, please. If retaliatory cyber attacks are performed, again, they're going to need to balance the following. And if an executive asks you about this, just push them back to this 5-point test, right? And then step back and ask, do we likely sit inside this 5-point test, right? The intersection of those points leaves some fairly narrow sets of targets. I know that our nightmare scenarios are taking down utilities, taking down hospitals, et cetera. This might be possible. It certainly is possible, but it violates number 2 and largely number 5, right? And so again, if we begin ground or air operations, obviously in Ukraine or in basically fighting Russia, obviously this assessment is going to change. But today, this is my assessment. I would assess that unless a particular target meets those 5 criteria, it's not a likely target for Russian government threat actors. And with that, I know it's been a whirlwind here, but with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rob to introduce Tim to talk about critical infrastructure.
Thanks, Jake. I don't know if you saw this, but either right before this webcast or right after we started, news broke that the Conti team is officially announcing full support of the Russian government if anyone will decide to organize a cyber attack or any war activities against Russia, we are going to use all possible resources to strike back at critical infrastructure of an enemy. That's from their leak site. Any comment on that?
I don't think that that's that surprising to me. I think we've always known that there's a tight, tight correlation between, obviously Russian intelligence services and some of the ransomware actors that call Russia home. No different than, in the U.S. we have a very strong cybersecurity presence drawn from, the Department of Defense and other intelligence agencies. So that they would be similarly aligned there doesn't surprise me at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Next
sir.
up, diving right into what does that mean to attacking critical infrastructure? We have our leading expert, Tim Conway, who has spent a massive amount of time in Ukraine helping shore up their critical infrastructure, going all the way back as some of the early attacks with Black Energy and others. Tim's experience in leading the industrial control systems curriculum, it goes without saying, without individuals like Tim, his experience, and those that came before, especially Mike Asante and the team that he put together with Robert M. Lee and Dragos and others, critical infrastructure protection via cybersecurity is one of the most asked questions that SANS is receiving today, especially as the escalation of the invasion continues and the question of cyber spillover that Jake mentioned is addressed. Tim is going to talk about this and walk you through what is needed to know now and what you should be really concerned about, just like what Jake was saying, in terms of what we currently know today from what we're seeing for the current escalation of events in Ukraine. Tim?
Thank you, Rob. Just making sure you can hear me.
Yes.
Good. All right. Very generous introduction. I appreciate it. Before we dive into some discussions of past attacks, adversary capability, I recognize across the thousands of folks who are joining us today, many may be hearing industrial control systems for the first time. They may hear terms like operational technology for the first time, and even the concept of critical infrastructure. I just want to spend 30, 40 seconds on a couple of slides to say, when we're talking about critical infrastructure, there's a number of electric utilities, healthcare, transportation, natural gas, oil, chemical, kind of the 16 critical infrastructure is defined in the US and abroad in the world, just critical infrastructure asset owners and operators. You may think about them from their IT, information technology side of the house. What I'm going to be talking about is more on the operational technology side. So Rob, if you can go to the next slide. We will just define those two things in as broad a term as we can. So if you're from the SANS audience and some of the thousands that are here joining us, and you've heard of data, kind of focus on data at rest and storage or in a database or in a file system, data in motion across a network and data in use in a processor and memory space or in an application set. Think of that kind of in the information technology IT domain. As you think about operational technology, think about data that does something. So it has a physical kinetic element to the data. It is either representing the state of something in the field or the state of a process, or you have the capability to use it to manipulate the state of that process. So thinking about IT and OT in those ways, and we're just going to talk a little bit now about the OT or critical infrastructure elements. Next slide. I don't know if I have a bad internet. There we go. All right. So I bucketed these things into kind of three capabilities of adversary groups and what are they targeting? Are they targeting confidence? And some examples there, kind of the Estonian 2007 attacks, very similar to what we've seen over the last couple of weeks in Ukraine, impacting government websites, impacting government resources. Are they targeting elections, similar to what we've seen kind of in US in 2016 and beyond, kind of the influence operations? Are they targeting kind of Ukraine, as we've been seeing for years now, but escalating in anticipation of some level of action that we started seeing yesterday? As you look through those kind of confidence-based attacks and what they're targeting in those efforts, really trying to get to a point where causing a loss of confidence from a population in their government's ability to protect and defend and provide services that are necessary for citizens and the public. As you move over into kind of moving from targeting confidence to targeting capabilities, and as you're looking at capabilities and access operations and sustained access, and using systems and tools like a SolarWinds or any number of other kind of security tools that you may employ and architect into your environment, but now being able to leverage those tools and that access so they can be misused to the adversary's goals and deliver capabilities down, and kind of entertaining that process across as we've looked through the SolarWinds events. And as you look at the attacks of NotPetya, kind of leveraging trusted communications and interconnected systems and interdependent systems, and attacking that from a capability perspective to deliver and maintain access. As you look at VPN filter from 2018, largely looked at as kind of attacking small home office devices around the globe, but an entire separate command and control system and channel setup with capabilities specific to industrial control system protocols that was only targeting Ukrainian critical infrastructure. And carrying forward from that, looking at that perimeter device as you would normally look at your architecture, and understanding that that is a capability that when attacked and when compromised is no longer a perimeter device, but is now a pivot device into an environment. Going towards the targeting from confidence to capabilities to control. And now you can look to things like the events in Georgia in 2008 and look at the coordinated cyber physical attacks. And if you are the target of Ukraine, you could look to what occurred in Georgia. You could look to what occurred in Crimea, and you could say those were things that were a joint cyber physical operation, and they were conducted in that way. And what lessons can we learn from those actions? And now we're seeing that playing out across Ukraine as we speak today and starting last night, kind of moving through to strategic military sites, trying to gain control of critical infrastructure. For a very long time, countries like Ukraine have been looking to how do we become more energy independent? How do we sort of position our system where we can sever from the Belarusian electric system and sever from the Russian electric system, so that that can't be used as a target, that can't be used as a way to impact our critical infrastructure, because we're relying on it for normal operation. And tests and plans were in place, with tests expected and conducted on the 23rd of February, with an actual cutover for first time severing from the Belarusian system and Russian system planned for yesterday. Obviously incapable of being executed because of the actions that occurred. But looking to understand those lessons learned and act upon them, absolutely of interest to all. Looking at the 2015 and 2016 events, kind of different parts of sectors being attacked. In 2015, the distribution electric system. In 2016, the transmission electric system. I'll talk about each of those in just one slide apiece coming up here in a moment. And then advancing into additional types of capabilities and misuse of safety instrumented systems and protection systems, where truly the globe should be worried about this. Those types of safety instrumented systems and operational technology environments, they are there for the purpose of protecting equipment, protecting humans. They're not there for normal control and for system automation. That is what the distributed control system and other technologies are for. So if adversaries are doing work in a safety instrumented system and developing capabilities, that is for a purpose of causing equipment damage or causing human loss of life. And as you progress through very specific elements like a VPN filter attack that has been identified and executed across a chlorine facility kind of in Ukraine, impacting sort of some of their operations in mid 2018. And again, just kind of seeing how confidence, capabilities, and ultimately leading into control impacts can be demonstrated by this adversary group. Next slide. When we talk about the two different types of attacks that sort of really opened up the picture to adversary capabilities and how they would conduct operations in critical infrastructure, a very common use case for lessons learned is the 2015 Ukraine attack. 3 different organizations targeted in that attack, 3 different industrial control systems and SCADA systems involved, over 50 substations and targets in the field impacted, 225,000 customers out, lots of field devices impacted from a firmware corruption perspective, loss of load, so servicing customers, residential, business, 135 megawatts of load impact, and hundreds of servers and workstations impacted that had a direct effect on operations' ability to restore service. Next slide. Again, that 2015 attack all focused on the distribution, go back one, all focused on the distribution environment, and oftentimes kind of looking across some of the things that were covered by Kevin and covered by Jake, looking at adversary actions and looking at it from one perspective of how do they operate, from the IT preparation to the delivery and initial foothold, kind of the land and expand hunting and gathering elements, but then moving into the how do we now with this position understand the operational environment. They are all unique in understanding how they operate, how they're configured, and what needs to be done to achieve a goal will drive additional actions and drive kind of that understanding need and the engineered kind of specific attacks. The ultimate sequencing and pre-work, the attack position, and the attack launch. You could also view this sort of timeline from the perspective of all of the available opportunities to the defenders at each stage, looking at what the adversary is going to be doing and what you could have uniquely done or can uniquely done to better position yourself to reduce the effects of a successful attack. Next slide. As we position to the 2016 attacks, just sort of understanding that in 2015, 3 different companies distribution, 2016, one organization that is a state-owned and operated transmission system. But now the attack going towards the transmission level, where 50 substations, 50 plus in the past, resulted in 135 megawatt load impact. Now on the transmission side, different system, different capabilities, single substation impacting 200 megawatts of load. And those attacks, and using the attacks against those systems and understanding how that power impact, that power flow isn't going to stop at country borders. Understanding that when you're attacking a transmission system, you need to understand power system dynamics, that it is going to flow into neighboring countries like Russia, like Belarus if they're connected, or flow into Poland or other intertie countries if they are connected. So knowing the current state of the electric system and using that to inform your attacks, very important based on your goals. Next slide. I'm getting updates very slow. All right. So the one element in 2016 that I would call out, 2016, the attacks against the transmission system, where 2015 was very manual, very operator-driven attacks. 2016, we saw the introduction of a modular malware capability being used in the attack, the capability of adversary groups and operators being demonstrated by this country. That indicates the rapid ability to load different industrial control system protocols into this framework and the ability to load in different exploits that would be necessary to achieve a goal on target within the industrial control system space. Next slide. This next slide, again, I put this in here simply because the information is going to be all available to you. I'm not going to highlight all the roles here. We demonstrate the differences between the malware role in 2015 and 2016. 2015, highly orchestrated, highly targeted, highly coordinated, I should say. 2016, very targeted to a specific substation, very targeted to specific devices in that substation on the protection side. Most significant elements, 2015, first public cyber attack on civilian power infrastructure. In 2016, the discovery of this modular malware and this framework to attack operational technology devices and industrial control systems in a very rapid way. Next slide. As Jake mentioned, kind of what to expect, and for any of us to truly pretend and sort of try to sell certainty in this model, it's a very unpredictable space. But certainly, if you are within Ukraine, you would anticipate ongoing coordinated cyber and physical attacks from multiple adversary groups and potentially from other supporting nations. You should also expect some level of critical infrastructure impacts that enable invasion strategy and entrenchment, but more on the cyber side where possible to avoid destruction of critical infrastructure that would then need to be repaired, replaced to support overall strategy of the invasion. If you move towards the worldview, so you're not in the direct conflict zone, you should anticipate obviously less of the physical presence, as you're not on direct border where the invasion is occurring or in country, but you're not kind of on completely the other side of the internet either. You're sharing an internet border. As ally nations sort of support Ukraine, as Russia looks to how can we impact and control and leverage critical infrastructure to our benefit, and other neighboring countries or supporting countries are looking to provide service and provide support or provide any level of help, from a cyber to natural gas needs to whatever it is. Certainly adversary groups here in Russia and other nations will look to impede the ability for critical infrastructure and other nations that are supporting Ukraine. You should expect some level of positioning, capability validation occurring now, and obtaining information so effects-based attacks could be achieved if they were necessary. Also, think beyond just the targeting of service outages. Most people from a operational technology, critical infrastructure perspective think the worst thing in the world is an outage could occur. We could lose our power, or we could lose our natural gas when we need it. Their focus is on outages, and really just understanding as this continues to escalate, as this continues to progress, making sure we don't have a gap in imagination here. The worst thing that could happen is not outages. The worst thing that could happen is the system is kept up so it can be used to damage itself or damage load. And those are much longer term issues that would take a long time to recover from, versus an outage that you could recover from with manual operations in a short period of time. We need to be comfortable with the discussion and understanding that outages are not the worst thing that could happen. Misuse of a system and equipment damaging attacks are the worst things that could happen. If you can go to the next slide. And I'm close to closing, just kind of continuing on that path. From a physical perspective, there are lots of things that could happen from a physical equipment damaging perspective, looking to the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and kind of the physical attacks on transmission towers, very kind of present, and understand what that means from a power flow and from a critical infrastructure. But for remote nations, remote countries, thinking about equipment damaging attacks, talking about from a cyber perspective and a physics perspective, using those controllers to cause equipment impacts, thinking about disruption, operational impacts, equipment overwrites, breaking of embedded systems, or potentially using those systems to impact service customers or the equipment operation directly. Last slide. Last element is just, again, more for a takeaway, but as you're considering kind of incident response, and here I've titled it operational response, and I've sort of used the traditional SANS preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned model, and modified it from an operations perspective in regards to what things will matter the most during an event. And some of those most important things, from an information collection and identification of adversary presence and trying to eradicate, many of those things will be lower priority. And some of the initial priority on the operational containment is understanding where an adversary would need to be to achieve an effect, and working towards moving that system in a isolated or a manual control or a control inhibit model to contain the effect that could be achieved. And then you could start to work through traditional containment within the digital devices and the IT or OT segments, but focusing on the mechanical process that's under control first to safe the system and move to a manual control at high criticality targets. With that, I know we were hoping to save about 10 minutes for questions. So Rob, I will turn it back to you.
All right, excellent. Just a few more slides here. Are we good to go through? It says wrap up Tim Conway, but actually it's wrap up with me. I had Lance Spitzner do a quick slide about the human side. Lance heads up our security awareness subject matter expert group. And, it goes without saying, I had a couple of reporters ask me about this yesterday too. It's like, what do individuals need to worry about? Do they just say, hey, rely on the company to provide the defense, rely on your enterprises, what do I need to do personally? And just to remember, always go back to the fundamentals, especially in your security awareness programs. We're talking about that if ransomware is going to come in, if some of these attacks are going to happen, they're still going to potentially use and likely use many of the, the human target to be able to click on the thing, be an email, a link, that is provided to you to get that initial access. If you need to, if you're an enterprise, you could always go through and double down on just doing a quick briefing for your employees, especially right now, just to reemphasize the fact of, be on the lookout for potential phishing, anyone who's trying to ask for your passwords, even by phone calls, any random updates to software. These things, go back to the basics, going back and, the basic cyber hygiene stuff that you need to worry about is important, especially if you're trying to say, what can we do? What can we tell our people to do? And what can you do personally when you're worried about these attacks, that could spill over and you're worried about you potentially being a target. Nothing goes beyond just a quick refresher on just, hey, if it's going to come in, it's going to look surprisingly familiar. But, like I get a lot from, my bank, and they look really good. But in reality, those things are definitive phishing attacks on me. The resources we're putting together, this webcast primarily focused in on the threat, with what Kevin was able to put together, what the Russian activities are currently doing that's out there, including, what we just saw in the past hour with the Conti group basically throwing down the gauntlet and saying that if you attack Russia, we're behind Russia, we're going to meet, and respond as well. And then we end up taking a look at what are the key data points surrounding attacks on critical infrastructure, trying to really understand how that might look, how that might transpire. Now, beyond that, what is the call to action here? What do we do? What are the types of things? Jake had a list. We already posted that list. We have additional resources and webcasts that are going to be coming up, and we've created a blog that is going to be hosting these. Some of these items are already out on the blog. One of the things Joe Sullivan put together yesterday is the CISO action items in Ukraine cyber crisis, and a downloadable PDF of action items to consider for leaders that are directly affected by the cyber crisis in Ukraine. This is one of the things that we did at SANS, that when this thing was kicking off earlier this week, I asked all the instructors, I said, hey, as we're moving forward in this, you are the security leaders of the community. What can we do to help provide community resources? And if you're sitting on something you would like it distributed, let us know. This is one of those things that was put together. We also have the security communications template. And this is, again, by Lance Spitzner, on the human side, really, how do we talk to our employees about this? How do we clear the FUD? How do we be that steady hand that we're all trying to be? Upcoming, we have Mick Douglas and John Hubbard. There was a tweet that went out that went viral just yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, about, if you're concerned about trying to make it as difficult as possible for any attacker, if there's spillover or not from the Ukrainian crisis that's currently going on. I asked Mick if he's interested in taking those 6 tweets and make them into a long form PDF and blog that is currently being worked on and is going to be released later today, if not early tomorrow. But pay attention to the resources that we have here. That URL that you see up at the right-hand side of the screen is where you should bookmark, keep that up to date. Any additional webcasts, information, and more will be on that blog, in addition to being tweeted out by the SANS Institute. We do have about 97 questions. So I don't know if Jake, Kevin, and Tim, you can just go back on screen. What we're going to do with this is we're going to take all these questions. We have the SANS staff behind the scenes that have taken all the questions offline. We're going to answer them individually and put them in a document on that URL under the resources page here. But in order to make time and for keeping us under the 1 hour mark, I'm basically going to thank our speakers and our experts that were able to put this presentation together in less than 24 hours in trying to really baseline and understand what is currently known as a result of the Ukrainian crisis. I just want to go back to each of our speakers to see if they have any additional final thoughts before we say goodbye. I'll start with Kevin, who led us off.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, maybe one final thought on the resources. So as far as I see, there's a lot of questions in there, like where we will get the resources, where we will get the MITRE tech, for example, that I shared, things like that. I will share that with you. I guess that will then go on the blog somewhere, right? And then another thing on Conti, make sure that you keep checking how they do their attacks. I mean, they probably will change some things, but they are people, right? So check how they do their stuff, check how they did any past attacks, and try to defend against those like that. They probably won't change as much in the way they are doing their attacks. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Jake.
Yeah, so I guess I'll close with two notes, right? First, it is far more likely right now in most organizations that you will suffer an outage due to a self-inflicted injury responding to FUD than from a Russian government cyber attack, right? Be that steady hand, be that calm hand, walk back through what we talked about with stakeholders there. And then, as you mentioned, right, getting all this stuff together in rapid time. Obviously, it takes a village. I definitely want to thank all the rest of the SANS faculty, as well as the folks over at Curated Intelligence have helped me out a bit as well. It's a nice little intelligence community. They have a free feed also. So anyway.
Thank you, Jake. Tim.
I just want to thank Rob, the other speakers. I know each one of us could have been on here for a couple hours walking through kind of very focused discussions. I think that's something we can all look to next week. This is a very dynamic situation, and each one of these topics, from very specific suggestions and recommendations on cyber defense or cyber threat intelligence, everybody plays a role in this from a defender perspective. And definitely from a critical infrastructure and industrial control system side, there's a lot to consider and a lot to think about that I think you can look to SANS and kind of our efforts with our instructors and our vast community to kind of pull those resources together over the coming weeks. But, for right now, just thinking about the people in country and kind of running critical infrastructure and doing our daily jobs is really, really hard. And things get far more difficult when things like this and escalations continue to occur. So definitely thinking about the people in country. Appreciate the time, Rob.
Appreciate that. And, Tim, you've been there and the people, have many personal friends over there too. So, our heart and our prayers go out to the current situation. Without further ado, on behalf of the SANS Institute, the instructors, authors, the SANS staff that was able to put this together on a moment's notice, truly thank everyone, and thank you all the attendees for attending. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, again, get them into the questions and Q&A right now, and then we'll try to get them posted to the SANS URL Ukraine Cyber Crisis blog. Thank you again. My name is Rob Lee. I'm the Chief Curriculum Director here at the SANS Institute, and I'll see you next time.